Good afternoon. My name is Johanna Koljonen. I have the pleasure of hosting today's conversation. Welcome to Inkonst. Welcome also to our viewers of the stream online. I must start with addressing the elephant in the room. There seems to be some kind of glitch in our system affecting our slides, but not, I am told, the stream. We'll work with this. We'll see what we can do and see if we can figure it out. I need, I think, to say a few words about myself. When I'm not guiding this kind of event, I split my time between researching participation practices and advising the film and TV industries on their structural transformations. And in the last decades, I've additionally juggled careers in print and broadcasting as a non-fiction author, immersive producer, done some occasional online activism and cultural volunteer work. I'm mentioning all of this because in today's conversation, it might come up. The changes we're talking about today affect so many different fields. Essentially anything that involves audiences or participants, any field in which we want to communicate messages, move citizens, or create communities. I know you all represent a wide range of fields as well, so don't be shy to contribute questions when the time for that comes. We're talking today about such a massive challenge that it's going to take everybody's experience to crack it. Basically, it breaks down to a cluster of problems. Social media, as they were first introduced to us, provided meaningful services and solved real problems. That's why they took off. They offered low-threshold ways to communicate with many people without institutional backing, which opened enormous possibilities for people like everyone in this room, especially including the creators of cultural works, producers of cultural events, and what we in Swedish called folkrörelser, which literally in English means civic organizations. But the literal translation is popular movement, or maybe even populist movement, and those sure took off, powered by social media as well. As the information monopolies and the business models of traditional media channels got disrupted by this process and sometimes partially or completely undermined, the ways that we used to communicate with people also became less and less feasible. Some of them didn't exist anymore. And this is, by the way, including our old marketing channels that you could just pay for reach. The way we used to do that didn't really work either. Some disappeared entirely, some became prohibitively expensive, and some are still there, but don't reach a lot of people anymore, or not the people we are trying to reach. For many culture makers, this wasn't actually a huge problem at first. Not as long as social media worked, not as long as social media and traditional media remained in some kind of harmony so that digital advertising worked. Over time, however, these media types have become increasingly oppositional to each other, just at the same moment as very many social media have also become increasingly bad. And by bad, I mean less useful and less fun. There's a technical term for this, I'm sure you know it from the literature. It's called enshittification. And especially useless is Facebook, which means that reaching one core culture-consuming audience, middle-aged cultural ages such as myself, is now increasingly difficult. And of course, all of this happens at the precise moment when the close alignment between global media companies and global tech companies and hyper-capitalist or even completely explicitly authoritarian values has become unavoidably clear. Yet people need each other. Culture needs its reach, and organizing, whether against political extremism or against alienating and world-destroying business practices, also really does require communicating with a lot of people. So how do we begin to address this on this enormous structural scale? That is our topic today. And we have a headline: Rethinking Social Media Platforms, New Strategies for Engaging an Audience. This is a headline that I find clear, knowledgeable, straightforward, and kind, completely on brand for two of our hosts, Media Evolution and the Region Skåne. But maybe not super sexy. could also have been expressed a little bit more colorfully, maybe. So in the style, maybe perhaps of our third host, Inkonst, I gave it a little underground and participatory spin. Here, please see a few suggestions provided over lunch online by some random buddies of mine. Oops, exciting. Welcome to the seminar, Unfriending Elon, Pre-Digital Media Habits for Post-Digital Sustainability. Methadone for meta users, a detox for the discerning cultural audience. Or how about Trust Me, from algorithmic censorship to distributed community. Doom scroll divorce, conscious uncoupling from fascist billionaires. Here's a few for the academics. Luddite flaneurs, carrier pigeons, reaching physical people in actual places. Can we just talk how not to be a pickup artist but still get paid? Screw Silicon Valley, I'm going home. Digital emancipation from late capitalist techno-feudalism. I mean, being too immersed in academia, clearly. I like this one, prophylactic media strategies for digital citizens who want to avoid the ick. Dude, where's my soul? Ending and shittified doom scrolling to rebuild community participation. This was actually genuinely good. This should have been the title. How about a really straightforwardly Swedish take? No kulturstödspengar for the Zuck, getting butts into seats without subsidizing Silicon Valley. As an immigrant, I feel weird about making fun of Sweden. But I align with these values, right? And if we're going to get political anyway, swipe left, radical strategies for meaning over commodity. And finally, my favorite, the internet is full, go away. But seriously, folks, no. Welcome back to Rethinking Social Media Platforms, which kind of contains in it these multitudes, as at best does the internet, right? Our first speaker today is an analyst of digital rights focused on the intersection of technology and society. He has over 20 years of experience in internet activism, research, and related work both in government entities, non-profits, and community-based organizations. He previously worked at SIDA, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, with a specific focus on online freedom of expression. He's also headed digital security and protection programs at the Swedish human rights organization Civil Rights Defenders, specifically supporting human rights defense and civil society organizations in repressive environments. Currently, he works with resourcing open source technologies for internet freedom. Please welcome Marcin de Kaminski.
Thank you, Johanna, and welcome to my short tagline. If it's shown, it's always difficult to understand how to frame a talk which is so creative and inspirational, hopefully. So I try to understand what this means to me. For me, the discussion we have today is to try to revisit what happened on the internet and kind of beyond the internet before we had a system which is dominated by big platforms, surveillance capitalism, and authoritarian regimes trying to shape our information space. And that's why I have the tagline of trying to bring us back to the internet as we know it, but also then, actually, we have been 30 years online, and this is the discussion we have now. We are worth more and should create more, also because we need to do that to survive in the ecosystem that we have today. And 30 years ago, I was just as old as my youngest kids. I was 13, 14 years old. And I had the privilege to begin studying at the school in 8th grade, in a school which had a European Union grant to introduce the internet to Uppsala, a city north of Stockholm. So what my school did was that they threw out all the typewriters, which we had just until that year, and bought on the European Union grant computers for a lecture space and started to understanding how can this be connected to this new thing, the creation called the internet. I had no idea about this, but being geeky, being a bit maybe an outsider, I had the opportunity to work with my beloved Christer Edlund, my computer science teacher at Tiondaskolan in Uppsala, and helped him to set up the network which then connected computers to other computers in the school, but also connected our school to other schools. So by understanding how you practically navigate to connect different computers to each other, we also then envisioned and created what was our part of the network of networks, which we know now as the internet. It took a few years before I understood the big thing about the internet, and I think it mainly stems back to the fact that I'm also, just as we heard before, I'm born in Sweden, but I am the child of immigrants. We carry different stories that then shape our understanding of the world and also shape the creations or the ambitions that we have in life. My parents came from Poland. They came as forced refugees. They were expelled from Poland during the 1960s and they came to Sweden. And what they did when they came here was not to grieve. They started mobilizing here as well, because what they were forced, because of the fact that they were forced to leave Poland as a result of their political activities and also being Jewish. So what they did in Sweden was that they organized, together with friends and colleagues, print shops. They started printing material that could be subversive for the then Polish government, and they smuggled this material into Poland and the Czech Republic over what's here visualized as the Iron Curtain, which then span through the European continent. When I understood that the internet suddenly connects people between different countries, behind different curtains, even if digital, that was mind-blowing to me. When I understood that we could, through just knowing how to connect different computers and also how to create different online communities, be a counterpower to the discourse that was happening in Sweden back then, it was amazing. During the late 1990s, Sweden had a big Nazi problem, as you may recall. There were street fights, including here in Skåne, between neo-Nazis and anti-fascists. And what me and my group of peers, meaning kind of political activists, started doing was to set up alternative communication spaces for civil society organizations, back then activist groups, in order to make sure that they could actually continue to communicate without being dependent on what we then called kind of the mainstream media. Back then it was called that we set up alternative medias, but that obviously has a different connotation in Swedish, at least now. Anyway, this mindset of trying to understand how the internet could actually help civil society organizations and also connect communities and activists throughout the world continued to live with me. And for many years, until maybe the Arab Spring, it became some kind of vision that I had, that if we just use the internet right, we can then connect people, make sure that they actually mobilize and find their peers in order to create change. Obviously, it was not that easy, and that's kind of what this discussion is about. I think I would say that the highlight of my internet activist career came in the mid-2000s. I was part of a small group. Maybe you've heard about this, but we were a small group, basically kind of hacker geeks, and we understood how to use the internet to provide and share information without having to go through some kind of commercial entities. We called ourselves the Piracy Bureau because here in Sweden we already had an anti-piracy bureau kind of chasing file-sharing kids, but there was no proactive movement, so we started that. One of the biggest projects that we started was called the Pirate Bay, and that was then an attempt to show that it's actually possible to create a distribution chain for culture information without having to have middlemen in the way of the free distribution online. We started the project as a small kind of project for our friends. We anticipated maybe hundreds, thousands potentially users, but then as the history showed, we actually struck a nerve and the Pirate Bay became bigger than we expected. One of the kind of interesting paths for the Pirate Bay was obviously that we ended up, or the Pirate Bay ended up in court. And here I'm depicted in one of the SVT series about the Pirate Bay when I held a speech at the trial of the Pirate Bay. And this is actually one of the few spots where I will read aloud, because one of the interesting bits was that yes, we did the file sharing parts, yes, but our ambition was also bigger. We saw that there was a systemic issue with having companies and authorities meddling in how we communicate and what kind of information we share. So the speech, if you would see the series or if you happen to be there, was partially a long kind of many sentences of basically rants and maybe kind of rants about the authorities, about the prosecution, about the companies that tried to sue the Pirate Bay. But it was also a kind of a speech to try to set the tone for the discussion around the internet and how internet organizing could be seen onwards. So among the things that I said outside of the court, one could claim we are witnessing the collapse of justice. One could claim that this is the final nail in the coffin of free information. We choose, meaning we as the internet, we choose to see this for what it is, a sabotage against what we call the internet. We cannot silently watch as our internet is caged, restricted, locked down. Because the internet is as a hydra. It's a hydra on speed. For every head you cut off, the Pirate Bay, 100 more will grow. What now must be done is to build an internet that cannot be controlled, that cannot be locked down. We need to build a thriving garden, a flourishing forest, and then I continue to make some kind of philosophical spiel about the internet. Amazing. I mean, this was like 2009, and sometimes I can return to these days just to recall how the internet was before the platforms, because this was kind of what followed. In the speech and Pirate Bay started to kind of fizzle out in 2009. Back then, Twitter was not a thing. We actually reported on the Pirate Bay trial on something called Bloggy, which was a kind of a mimic, a Swedish Twitter mimic. And to understand that we moved from that kind of exploratory, innovative arena to something which was known as kind of the platform society is a bit depressing, to be honest. What happened was that Google was already in place, Facebook just started in the US, Twitter started growing. And by that time, when the politicians and policymakers in Sweden and in other countries started understanding that you need to navigate the internet in order to shape the future to come, me and others were asked to join, and just as in my presentation, I joined SIDA, the Swedish Development Cooperation Agency, to try to help SIDA to understand how to navigate digital issues. One of the things that we concluded through my input was that the platforms, because of their size, need to be seen as accountable duty bearers. Meaning, if Facebook have more users than many countries, most countries of the world, obviously we need to be able to also ask them to follow, for instance, human rights. A bit naive, yes, maybe, but at the same time interesting to see how one could navigate that space. I think we made some kind of smaller wins. For instance, a big coalition of civil society organizations turned to Meta, back then it was Facebook, and shaped what was then kind of started to being introduced as the real name policy, where Facebook wanted to identify, control, understand who is on their platforms, because their idea was that if we don't know exactly who is there, we will see malign activities and also not being able to shape the information space. This harmed not, I mean, in this case, it harmed the kind of trans communities, LGBT communities, but also indigenous communities or communities from countries where US English is not the native tongue, meaning that many of Facebook's users were discriminated, banned, and kicked off the platform because of their names. So a coalition of civil society organizations, including those supported by SIDA, Sweden, other countries, turned to Facebook and actually got them to roll back that policy, which was one of the few but important wins. Another one could be that Yahoo, back then it was still an important internet platform, actually, because of the pushes from civil society in 2012, turned on end-to-end encryption for all their email messages, which was not happening before, meaning that communities in Southeast Asia suddenly got safer, at least, in their online communication. Twitter was an interesting beast because they introduced something called the Trust and Safety Council, of which I was a part as well, where we tried to shape the moderation policies that Twitter back then used to control and at least have some kind of understanding of the hate speech on their platforms. This was, to be honest, quite progressive as for an internet platform, but something happened, and what happened was Elon Musk. So when Elon Musk came into office, the first thing he explained to us and also to his users was that X, which he rebranded Twitter to, is a commercial platform, and human rights are not a profitable entry point for this venture. So what he did was that he just dismantled the Trust and Safety Council, reduced the moderation on the platform, and bang, we had suddenly a skyrocket in harassment and hate speech on X. And I think this was a turning point for many, including many in this room, I would assume, that when Twitter became X and we saw what could actually happen, that was also maybe the first time people started thinking that there is something else. We don't need to be dependent on the big platforms. For us that kind of were active before the platforms were even a thing, this was more, from my perspective at least, going back to basics. Kind of, what does this mean? Can we imagine an internet or online ecosystem where we are not dependent on profit-hungry capitalistic entities like the platforms? Because what they will do will always mainly benefit the shareholders, or oligarchs in some cases. I continue to work with many of the platforms in different ways because I had some kind of hope that we actually can do this better. My problem was that any time I tried to talk about human rights with the platforms, they wanted to talk about balloons or kind of some kind of sky thingies, kind of shooting internet across different spaces in the world. And as we know it now, I mean, connectivity in some places is basically kind of funneled through Starlink, which is working, yes, but it's still controlled by one person, ultimately. So this is not a sustainable solution. My progression has been that I moved from working in this government entity to actually trying to understand what can be done outside of this box, which we know as the echo chamber of platforms. And what I understand, which I hope that we can agree on, and at least start kind of moving as a mental image, is that, first of all, we need to go back to understanding the power of encryption. The entity that I work with now, we fund only encrypted tools, open source tools that are meant to make sure that communication is safe online. And if we cannot guarantee proper end-to-end encryption, then nothing that we know as the digital communities that we know of today is actually safe for us to use. We also need to make sure that governments cannot control the information that we want to participate in. And even if I work mainly with trying to make sure that activists in repressive environments can speak freely without being censored by authoritarians, this is a practice that I think we all can incorporate into the ways that we try to understand why this is important. So encryption tools, VPNs, extremely important, and also trying to understand how can we build an independent connectivity without being tied to corporates. So we work with experimental technologies. We work with satellites, yes, but open source satellite technologies. We work with mesh technologies and peer-to-peer connectivities because we want to understand how can we make sure that communication can sustain no matter what kind of controls and information controls are put in place. Hopefully, I mean, still being a bit naive and optimistic, of course, but hopefully this can become a strong and independent alternative to the platforms as we know them. Because in my brain, at least, I still hope that the internet as we knew from the start, meaning a network of networks, is what we can work on together as well onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll let you sit down, clear as water. Our next speaker researches and communicates internet culture, online hate communities, and digital harassment. She has studied the manosphere and anti-LGBT movements for many years, and is co-author of the book Kontroll temmes, Controls Be Tamed. She is also a part of Cybernauterna, a network of cybersecurity and digital media experts offering courses, talks, and advice. Since 2018, they worked on making digital issues like online privacy, fake news, algorithms, and cybersecurity accessible to non-experts through creative participatory workshops, while combining a love of technology with a critical approach to the digital world. Please welcome Maia, Kahlke, Lorentzen.
Hello. Okay, there it is. Hello, everybody. Oh, this is the first slide. My name is Maia Kahlke Lorentzen. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'm gonna kind of catch the presentation where you left it. So we had a little bit of internet history of what it used to be like. And now we all agree we are in dire straits, and we all want to break up with big tech in some shape or form, not just social media, but also generally there seems to be a fatigue with the various tech platforms that the tech moguls are using. I think this image from the Trump inauguration really narrowed it in for a lot of people who are not necessarily super knowledgeable about digital tech policy or Silicon Valley, but really realizing that these people are actually leaning into a Trump administration, and that the kind of digital platforms that you use are also suddenly becoming a political issue. So I, like you said, I work with the organization Cybernauterna. We're a Copenhagen-based cooperative. And since January this year, we've been invited to do a lot of workshops and a lot of talks about alternatives to, in the beginning, it was mainly Meta, because people got really, really tired of Meta, specifically after Mark Zuckerberg, I don't know if you remember him posting the video where he was talking about the change to Meta's platform policies, that they were getting rid of fact checkers, that they were moderating their hate speech policies, so that suddenly it was okay to say, to use misogynistic language, to harass transgender people, and to say specific things about immigrants. So kind of leaning into the Trump policies. And this sparked a debate in a lot of different communities in Copenhagen on why Meta sucked, but quickly we realized that people were not just frustrated with Meta and Instagram, but with big tech in general, social media, but also, the email that they use. Suddenly they realize it's Google, and what do you work with that? And operating systems, music providers, and so on. So what we've seen is growth in interest in alternative platforms, and like you said, this is actually going back to basics for a lot of people who've been active in this field for a long time, because suddenly, right now, today, this evening, for instance, there is a Linux install workshop run by a lot of very young activists who've never heard of Linux before, but suddenly they're like, yes, there's an alternative operating system. And this is just very heartening for me to see as someone who's worked in this field for a while. But the things that people come to me with when they say that Meta, but also other social media platforms, they suck, is that suddenly they've experienced these, the shadow bans and the censorship are increasing, especially when you work in culture. For instance, there are specific topics that you can't advertise, or that will get you shadow banned if it's anything to do with nudity, if it's anything to do with sexuality, if it's to do with minorities in any shape or form. They're also becoming increasingly hyper-commercial and extractive. There's the endless scroll. They're removing fact checkers. There's the data harvesting. And also they're constantly rolling out these new features. For instance, recently Instagram changed from the square to the long format. And for a lot of people who work with their Instagram for years, this kind of ruined the whole aesthetic for them. So I know a lot of artists who've really worked with their feed for a long time, and suddenly it's useless, it's not coherent. different, and you have to suddenly work with video rather than photo and so on. But also non-consensually adding AI or training AI on your photos and your data is something that really worries a lot of people. And as we heard in the introduction, this has a name, and you assume that everybody heard about it. But if you haven't, I really recommend that you read this essay by the science fiction writer and philosopher Cory Doctorow, which is called The Enshittification of TikTok. And the enshittification concept is something that is very recognizable as soon as you hear his take on it, which is basically that first you build a platform that is really good to the users. You come in there and you meet maybe like-minded people, the way that it works. For instance, Twitter, suddenly you can read updates and news directly from the source in other countries, and you really enjoy it. And once you have critical mass of users, you can invite advertisers in. So that can be anything from the local mom and pop shop or cultural institution looking for a new audience to big advertisers like Coca-Cola. And then you start deteriorating the user experience and kind of putting ads in front of people where they're maybe not looking for it. Which is, of course, a natural evolution. If you have a commercial platform, then it has to be paid somehow. But the thing about enshittification is that once the advertisers, which if you work, for instance, in the cultural sector, or if you work in other sectors where you have to do advertising to an audience, suddenly you start leaning on these social media websites to reach an audience, and you start building an audience there. And once you're locked in, then the enshittification of you as an advertiser also begins. So you extract the value out to the shareholders. And as he says, from mobile app stores to Steam, from Facebook to Twitter, the enshittification cycle is that once everyone's logged in, surplus is handed to shareholders and the platform becomes a useless pile of shit. And we're seeing kind of that happening, not just on social media, but also, for instance, on places like Spotify, where you used to be able to be discovered as a musician, and suddenly you don't get any money unless you pay for a lot of streams, and you see maybe AI-generated music uploaded in your name, you're undiscoverable, and so on. So it becomes increasingly useless for users, and it also becomes increasingly useless for people who are looking for an audience, whether you're a commercial player or you're in the cultural field. So this is something that people are increasingly seeing and increasingly looking for alternatives. There's also, of course, like you mentioned in the introduction, the Silicon Valley far-right politics. Elon Musk is one big example, but also Mark Zuckerberg kind of leaning into the Trump rhetoric in order to not get his companies in order to kind of not get legislated against his companies. He's also been in debates with Donald Trump about censoring him before, but it's also people like Peter Thiel, close to the Trump administration, developing tools like Palantir, incidentally, that's used by the Danish police, for instance, but also just, TikTok increasingly leaning into censoring specific topics and promoting others and so on. So there's a very, for a long time, we had this hope that social media companies would moderate, and we saw some wins, like you said, for actually implementing hate speech policies and adding moderators. But now it seems like it's going very much in the other direction, and that we're seeing less and less moderation. And if we do see moderation, it's in favor of these far-right policies. So this leaves it in a very depressing place for some people. When I had the first talk about it, was like a big meeting in a cultural event house, a bit like this, and people were very emotional about like, where do we go? And I don't want to use Instagram anymore, and I feel very like sad about it, and so on. And what I told them was that this is not the first time, and it's also not the last time. I think the way this Twitter user put it when Elon Musk bought Twitter is very nice. On the internet, your home will always leave you. Because I don't know how long you've been on the internet, but if you've been on, Tumblr or early image boards and so on, things also constantly change. Things are bought up by billionaires or they close down. So this idea that you kind of imprint on a specific commercial platform, it's always going to disappoint you, and it's always going to change, usually for the worst if it's commercial. So we need to kind of lean into the idea that we're leaving these types of platforms. They're getting increasingly useless for us. They're getting in between our connections with people, and they're not giving us back the value, whether that's social or commercial, that we used to get out of it. So maybe it's time to find a new home. So what are some of the alternatives? And some of the alternatives that I recommend to people, the easy one, because what's difficult is not finding alternatives. What's difficult is actually getting people to start using them. So the first one to get off Meta and to start practicing is to start using Signal, which is an encrypted chat messaging app. If you're a bit more technical, you can also set up a Matrix server, but I'm not going to get into that. I just promised privacy nerds I would show Matrix as an alternative as well. But if your mom or your non-technical colleagues are still writing you on WhatsApp and Messenger, you can suggest to move the conversation to Signal because it's just as easy to use and it's encrypted. And just getting people to take that crucial step of having sensitive conversations that are usually in DMs away from Meta's platforms and on an encrypted platform is a really good first step in teaching people, like you said, the importance of encryption and the importance of privacy, and getting them to think about, okay, how much data do I actually share with Meta? And what is it being used for? What is being trained on it, and so on. We're also seeing that something that really keeps people locked in on social media platforms like Meta is the ability to do events there. I talk to a lot of people and they say two things that keeps them there are the groups, because when they start studying or they're on the school board or whatever, everybody uses Facebook groups, or you're invited to birthdays and events and you're kind of shut out if you don't stay there. So there are also lots of alternative events options. These are two examples. One is called Duk Up. It actually works in Malmö as well and has been built through many years in Copenhagen as an alternative event space. Partyful is a service where you can invite people to private parties, so they get information on SMS and they get reminders, and you can also share photos in a private space after an event. And I actually just learned that just today, somebody, a little group of promoters of techno music in Copenhagen just launched something called, what did they call it? It's called floor.tips. So you can hear it's like people inviting you to the floor of a techno club, but they build their own event server where people who are promoters of techno events and so on, they can make an event and then people can kind of go in and follow it. So they made an alternative event space, and they did that on in a space that I'd like to just briefly introduce as an interesting alternative that is called the Fediverse. How many of you have heard about the Fediverse before? Raise your hand. Yeah? How many have an account on some place on the Fediverse? Yeah? Okay. So very briefly, because I don't have a lot of time, the Fediverse is kind of an alternative internet. It's built on a common platform or a protocol called ActivityPub. So for instance, your emails, whether you're hosted on Outlook or Gmail, they are built on the same protocol, so you can email across different domains. And the same way, this ActivityPub is a protocol that you can build software on that can then talk to each other. But this is free software or open source software that is then built so everybody can basically go in and look at it and download it and run it themselves. So these are not social media companies. This is different types of software that is open and accessible. People can download it and run it, or they can develop it further. But it's basically alternatives to a lot of the services that you know from commercial actors. So networking on the top, you can see different social media services, multimedia like PeerTube instead of YouTube, PixelFed as an alternative to Instagram, Mobilize as an alternative with events, and so on. And just briefly, I'll introduce the two most important ones that people are most interested in. For instance, PixelFed is an Instagram alternative. Usually, people join the kind of main server. So you go into a website called pixelfed.social and you make an account, and you can see it kind of looks cute like an early Instagram in the 10s version. You know, it's photo first, you have little captions, and you can follow other people and kind of, you know, comment on each other's posts and so on. The thing about PixelFed is you can also download all the software and set up your own PixelFed server. So for instance, if you are a cultural institution or a workplace, you could host a PixelFed server on your domain, and then all your staff could get an account, and they could post from there, and everybody on the internet could read it and follow it from their own accounts. So that's the basic way the Fediverse works, is that you don't have these big tech companies where you sign up and then you kind of live in their data centers. It's open code and anybody can run it, and it also means that people can talk to each other across from these different networks. The same goes with the Twitter alternative, maybe more of you have heard about that. That is called Mastodon. So unlike PixelFed, this is a microblogging site. It's very much similar to Twitter. You can post, you know, short messages and threads, and you can find and follow each other. In 2022, when Elon Musk started talking about buying Twitter, I started a Mastodon server with some friends in Copenhagen. It's called helvede.net, so hell.net. And people can sign up, and I approve them because we don't necessarily want to be very big. I think we're about 200 people right now. We are mainly for feminists, queer people, and progressive nerds. But people on my server can follow anybody on other like places in the Fediverse, on other Mastodon servers, and read what they're writing, discuss with them. But they kind of live, they have an address. So my name is, for instance, Maia the Cyber Witch at helvede.net. So that's where you live, and that's where you have kind of your local community. And as someone who's moderated this Mastodon server for a while, when it was initially, it caught the interest of the media, one of the critiques was like, oh, but you know, you're just interested in people coming to join your server, so you're kind of promoting your own work. And what's important to say is, for me, I don't want to be like, I don't want a lot of people to live there. I think it's fine with a small community, and once we're at a certain size, I would rather suggest people setting up a new one so we can talk to each other, but we have like, you know, side-by-side online communities. It's paid by the users. They can give money via Patreon if they can, and it's moderated by 3 volunteer people. So we moved there from Twitter as an alternative, but it's also important to say that it's a very different experience from Twitter. But the Fediverse also have all these alternatives. It's clear that people have looked at it and said, okay, let's copy Reddit, but make it federated and open source. There is a TikTok alternative, a Facebook alternative, and a YouTube alternative. The great things about the Fediverse, and Mastodon in particular, which is what I have most experience with, is that it's decentralized. So like I said, the software is open, anybody can download it. If Elon Musk wanted to buy helvede.net tomorrow, even if I would sell it to him, my users could just move somewhere else. You can't buy the Fediverse because it's software written on the same protocol, and it's open for anybody to download and run. So you can just own the server where you live on. You also have a choice. Like I said, our server is specifically for a specific group of people. There's also a place called Nørrebro.space. So if you live in that local area, you can get an account. There's also a place called data.coop, which is an organization that works with data privacy. So if you buy a membership, you get an account. So there's this opportunity to find communities and live on a server or on an online space with like-minded people. There is a server for journalists, there's one for researchers, there's one for bird nerds, and sometimes it's like there's one in your local hood. There's no ads, there's no data harvest. You make your own algorithm. So rather than being served content, you have to go out and actually follow people. Otherwise, it's a very empty experience, which is actually a complaint for most people as well. It's moderated by the users. So you can choose a place that has the moderation policies they want. For instance, my server does not allow this kind of hate speech that Meta allows. And I would say, rather than being a social media that serves you content, it's a social network where you can find people, but you're not served any kind of passive experience. You have to connect and talk to people, just like in the old golden days of the internet, where you actually had to kind of participate to get something out of it. And then there's the so-called interoperability, which is an important point, because you can make an account on Mastodon and you can follow people on the other types of software because it's based on the same protocol. So imagine you could follow someone on Instagram from your Twitter account, or you could follow your friends on Facebook, even though you left Facebook and went somewhere else. The big tech companies, they wall their gardens. So if you have your friends on Facebook, for instance, that's why a lot of people don't want to leave, because you can't keep in touch. But in the Fediverse, you can move homes, but you can still keep in touch because it interoperates. So for instance, the event space that I just told you about that launched today, I can follow it from Mastodon and PixelFed and get news of events in my space. The problems with the Fediverse that we've experienced, and I've experienced in trying to get people to use it, and especially after this first surge of interest in January, February, March, is that it's clunky and it's technically difficult to use and understand. Maybe some of you are like, what are you even talking about? What's a server? It's like, where do I go? Where do I sign up? It's like, oh, you can sign up on 1,000 different places. Which one do you want? So it's like, there's maybe too much choice for some people who are very used to being guided by an app and kind of just, signing up one place and then everything is kind of explained for you. It's more likely to have outages and glitches because it's run by a lot of volunteers, basically all over the world. So volunteer developers as well. The software is mostly developed by volunteers. You make your own algorithm. For most people, that's actually not a plus anymore, especially for a younger generation. They make an account on Mastodon, they're like, there's no content. It's like, no, you have to, follow people and write something. It's like, but I want to be, I want the algorithm to serve me something. So to a lot of people, that's actually not a plus. We've gotten used to being served content and education or entertainment in specific ways. It's moderated by users. That can be a hassle as well. I don't know if any of you have ever done online community management or been an admin of a group or a social space online, but it's actually difficult when you know people. Much more difficult than kind of being a faceless admin, and the things people get pissed about. For instance, one of the things I recently had to admin a huge debate about was whether people should put a consent warning on photos of them eating meat on my server, because we have a lot of vegans and they don't like it. And I'm like, I don't think I should get into that, but it's, that became a big issue. The user cultures can be very exclusive because this is a space made by tech nerds, and the way they talk about it is very difficult to get into if you're a new person and if you're not a techie. And of course, it lacks critical mass. This is not a place that the masses will just march into and then, oh, this is just like Instagram, let's use it. Right now, it's very boutique, and people really have to land in the right place in order for them to actually start using it. And I also think it's important because that's what we found out when we started Hill.net instead of Twitter. It's not replacing Twitter. It's something completely different. It's a different way of relating to each other. It's a different way of talking to each other. It's a different way of sharing news. You don't come in and get a big audience. You come in and get social networking with people that is completely different and very, much more on the same level. So for a lot of influencers, content creators, media companies and so on, they're gonna miss kind of being able to broadcast to an audience, because that's definitely not what this is. But that also means that with social media, but also with alternatives to, for instance, alternative to Gmail, alternative to Google Maps, alternative to, browsers, alternative to operating systems. We need to get used to things being different. We're not going to just jump off from a commercial big tech platform and get the same experience. It's going to be slower, less visually appealing and clunky if we're going to try this model. Maybe we have to get used to not using one app for everything. So I have one app for events. I maybe have one for other things. Facebook really, succeeded in making us go there for everything, events and messaging. Maybe we have to get used to splitting that up a bit, paying for a crowdfunding service if it's free. They use our data. and changing our expectations for what apps can do. But it also means that we can get some upsides, like apps not trying to sell us things or steal our attention, services that are not surveilling us or selling or training data on our AI on our data. We can have more democratic and transparent and non-profit platforms. And last but not least, we can have a more mindful use of tech and smartphones. And this is something that I feel like a lot of people are really requiring. You know, that you're less sucked into this endless scroll and, you know, this kind of depressing, problematic feed. So if we had apps that were actually more utilitarian, it's like, I need this to connect with people. And then when I'm done with it, I'm going to put down my phone and do something else. This is also an opportunity because they're not as alluring, these like, you know, handheld apps as the big tech ones. So yeah, that's it. I don't think I have any more time, but I'm also done. Yes.
I am breaking in also to be able to throw in like one more clarifying question, just in case. So just to make extra sure that I understand, and everybody hopefully also understands, for us who are not yet in Fediverse and are a little bit like struggling to like, how do we, like what are the levels between servers and interoperability basically? Do I understand it correctly that there are different homes?
Yeah.
Like I pick a house and I move into this house with like 200 people or 2,000 people or 20,000 people.
Maybe a village.
Like a village, yeah.
Or a town or a big city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I like as a person in that universe can go to another square or visit another house because of course I have many identities and communities and that's one of the strengths, right? So I don't have to be only a citizen of Nauru.
No.
I can also be a bird watcher.
Yeah, you can go talk to the bird watchers anytime. It's just about your address actually, but you have freedom of movement. Unless, of course, you're an asshole and they block you in that town.
And then I don't get to be in birdwatching town anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you might want to think about your behavior.
Yeah.
Of course.
Honestly, bird watchers are a little bit like gatekeepers sometimes, so it could also be about them. But probably it's about me. Online, I think it's always about me.
There's definitely, some of these cities have very, very strict rules. And then maybe it's like, okay, maybe it's a bad match, you'll go to visit another city somewhere else. But yes, that's a very good real-world metaphor.
Okay, that helps me understand. We're going to get back to this, but let's have another talk before that. Thank you very much, Maia. Okay, so I will just summarize like super quickly what I have learned so far, or an insight that I have had, and I think that came from this idea that on the internet your home will always leave you. IRC. I said, and I could feel in my bones like platforms of my past. And I think it struck me that what you are yearning for, like everybody has like a phone in their pocket and we have the internet in our beds and things like that. And we're like, okay, this is clearly not working for me or for the world. So I want, And what we are yearning for is so determined by how old we are. Like which media landscapes we've already lived in. If you're 14, you're like, I don't know. If you're 24, you're like, social media used to work. I want to go back to when social media was good. Some of us want to say we want to go back to the internet when it was actually an internet. But what that means is also different. To some people, it's 2010. To some, it's 2002, 96. To some, it's before the World Wide Web was introduced and ruined everything. I also meet in my work with the culture sector a lot of people who are really yearning for like when newspapers and broadcast media worked, and you had culture pages, and we could just reach the culture audiences through these media. And I think what we all forget is that the next step came because that wasn't a great system, like broadcasting top down or like a very few voices like being determining good taste for everybody, for instance. That was also not a great system. That's why we needed the internet and so on. And I think this is why like the solution shouldn't be, the impulse will always be, I want to go back to when my media didn't suck for me. But instead, what we probably need to do is to start with a clean slate and go back to like, what are we actually doing? Like, what are we trying to achieve here? And what do we actually need? Like for the things we are making or for my life, what are the uses that I actually need these communications for? And that's kind of what we're going to do now. We're going to switch perspective from this sort of systems level to the super specific. Our third speaker today works at Skogen, an artist-run ecosystem of spaces, tools and processes for performance, publishing, video and collaborative art. With hubs in Gothenburg, Vara and Vårgårda, they host public events, study groups and shared meals. Skogen supports long-term sustainable cultural work and challenges short-term commercial models. Through shared resources and rural studios, they promote artistic self-organization and community resilience. He's also involved with Samarbetet, a grassroots network of cultural spaces, community gardens and self-organized groups. Please welcome Johan Forsman.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction. I want to have that written and sent to me afterwards. Yeah. I was supposed to kind of show a little bit later. I don't know if that's even going to work, but on the other hand, like show some websites and alternatives. We can also not show it and just be in the imagination of what could be possible to do. We'll see a little bit. Yeah, so Johan Forsman is me, and it's a bit of almost an irony that I am the last speaker here. It's about leaving Meta. I must admit, I didn't even join yet, so I'm a little bit behind. I'm definitely not a tech nerd. I'm definitely not that invested in these issues on the internet. But I have been running venues and platforms, and I have been thinking a lot around how we organize, how we get together, how we communicate, and of course, internet, and also in one sense, and social media comes into this. So I was thinking today that I will tell a little bit like the story of how Skogen has been working and what we have developed to, I don't know if I can say like bring an alternative, but at least what we have done to make something happen. We started in 2012, this place in Gothenburg called Skogen, which was then just one space. And very much with the idea that there is something very unsustainable in how we organize the art sector. There must be other ways to kind of do things more, to share the responsibilities for places, for example, not to have like some totally worked out administrators that work their asses out to get some audience that doesn't really have time to get there, and then there is some artist that doesn't get that much paid to do something. So like, okay, so how can we do something that is like organizing spaces together where we just meet, and then sometimes we might be the artists, sometimes we are the organizers, sometimes we are, I don't know, a little bit more sharing the responsibility for making something possible. And then after a few years, we realized that actually we also needed we just had this like WordPress website in the beginning, and of course that works. You just put things up, and people might go to this website and look for it. And then when we got more people, we were like 40, 50, 60 people that had keys to this place, and it was like a complete mess, of course, because like people were communicating on different forums and platforms, and there was someone responsible for the WordPress who then tried to like gather all the information of what was going on, and like always late to put things up, and people were frustrated and angry and so forth. And then we just thought, okay, we need to build something that is like to turn this website into some kind of intranet, so that we organize on the same place that we communicate. And then luckily I met this coder who was interested in the same thing, and in 2018 we started this adventure to kind of turn then the Skogen website into a kind of intranet for people who are interested in joining our work. Oh yeah. Do you think we should, does it work now? Should we try? Okay. Should I bring the technician up and we can start looking into things? No, the non-technician. A human being. Wow. Oh, yeah, look. So, it's not that complex, and I feel almost a little bit embarrassed after all these technical introductions. It's basically this website of Skogen, and what we have is a website, we have a program, we have different groups, we have publications, things happening, and we have our resources listed. And it's quite basic. Always there is this little plus sign here. So whoever we want to work together with, we verify them, and then so they get an account first in this plate, and then we verify them, and then they all get this plus sign. And with that, you can just add a new program, or you can just as easily create a new group, closed group, open group, or you can add a resource, or make a booking in the calendar, like if you want to have a meeting or something like that. So it's really a tool to kind of co-organize the space. There is an admin panel. It's very basic, where you can set up the site, how you want it to look, design it. You can make different kind of pages, composable pages. There's all these different features, like the groups. You can deactivate them if you don't want to have groups visible on the website, etc. And then we come to the users. So at the moment, there's 234 people who are in some way using Skogen, and we have 28 verified users at the moment. This can vary up and down. And these are the people who can book a space, use a space, yeah, make events or create groups or whatever. And then we have a few admins who will then decide who are verified. We also have a system where we can send the newsletters directly into this platform. So if you are joining Skogen, you will get the newsletters. It's just in the same system. And anyone in the system can send a newsletter. So it's basically a system to co-run a resource in a way that is, I think, quite basic and simple. Anyone who gets an account can choose if they want to be public, then they are visible in the list of people. And you can also search for competences here. So I'm interested in someone who do bike kitchen. Kirsty, let me find her and can contact her. So this is a page kind of that we built, not so much from having all these kind of clever ideas and really that much of analyzing, but just like we need to build something that makes it possible to run this place that we have. Yeah, it really came out of a need and a trial and error situation, I would say. And then after building this, or a version of this in 2018-19, other venues wanted the same system, and it's open source, so we said, go ahead, that's really cool. And then was the pandemic, which was really, I think, such a beautiful moment to reflect on where we were as a species. And we got this idea to use this time to think of the possibility to build a federation then out of, now we have different venues using the same tool, then we can actually technicians say we can connect that, get all the information into some portal, we can like see the resources in all the different places who are connected. So we started to play out with that, we got some funding, and that's basically what we did during the pandemic. So we built something that we call Samarbetet. It is what it sounds like. It's basically about collaboration then. So you can go to this portal app of Samarbetet, and then it looks similar, obviously. But this place, in this space on the internet, you can see what happens in all the different connected communities. And at the moment, we have these communities who are part of Samarbetet. Some communities are also communities created by communities. So for example, the community Residens, Vistelser, Utbyten is a community created by the communities in Samarbetet. So we're really still trying to figure out what this is, how to use it, what it can make happen. But I think in a way that's not actually that advanced, as I understand it, we create another map, I think. Instead of having the map that I am running my own, or this venue with some people, we are isolated, we are working too hard, we are, I mean, for me at least, it's a lot like that, you know, and you want to go to other venues, you don't have the time, and you get a bit annoyed because they suddenly got a lot of funding, and it's like, why? Why don't they see what we are doing here? And then it gets a little bit like competitive, and of course you also collaborate and everything, but there is still this kind of map that you are alone. And I think maybe that also is this kind of modernist idea that, you know, we are some kind of, supposed to be some kind of factories of art, but doing really not so commercial things. But what is happening here, I think, is that it creates another map that you see, aha, we're actually part of something bigger. There is this ecosystem. Our resources are a part of a bigger ecosystem of resources. And if you look into this ecosystem, it's suddenly a lot of things, like thousands, from super small things, like a screwdriver or a festool omrörare, to spaces. And I wouldn't say it works like, suddenly, you know, I can click on this Husqvarna batterimotorsåg and borrow that. It doesn't really function that low yet, at least, but something happens still. I know that this saw is there, and one day maybe there is an artist that I know who's asking for a saw, and I remember that. Or so I suddenly have another map in my mind of what resources there are around me. And I think the most important thing with Samarbetet has nothing to do with internet, actually. It's that we meet. And we meet quite a lot. And I think that is also somehow connected to, we have this new map, so somehow we belong together. And then we have these meetings, dinners, sauna sessions, other kind of informal meetings, where we always start with the question, how do you feel and what do you need? And the first session we had, people just cried. It was like, I was like, oh my God, this is like, we're 20 years too late to kind of save this. But somehow we cried a bit, we tried to find out, okay, so then how do we help each other? And there was someone like, our roof is leaking concretely. Okay, we go there, we fix it. If we're 30 people, we do it in a weekend. Someone else said, I got no money, I have this space, nothing, and I don't know what to do with it because I have now no money. And then someone else said, oh, but we just got money for a residency and we don't really know where to place the artist. It's just that simple. Or just to say that it's fucking hard at the moment, and we hear each other and we start thinking about it together. And it also becomes a platform, of course, to prototype or think about also other things like now, for example, we're thinking about, could samarbetet also be a currency, for example? Could we have an internal currency to help each other? Or could we, now that we have this system, could we also sell things at each other? I make a book. It's hard to distribute these kind of alternative books that artists tend to do. But you can use the network to sell it in 20 foyers in different places. So that's maybe a strange way to end up, but I think maybe also the alternative to meta or leaving meta is maybe not looking for the new meta, but also to start to meet up and you can print things and give to people like paper flyers. That's not also, I mean, that's something we do a lot at the moment, I think. That's the thing that works best, I think, post social media. Just printing, give your friends flyers and they give to people. That works great. So I'm not saying that this tool that we developed is like an alternative or it like brings hordes of people, but it creates another map. It helps people to feel engaged. We have a tool that can help us to host people who want to get engaged. And we meet and talk. So I mean, yeah, I don't know how much, I have a lot more time maybe. Or? I'm pretty much done, yeah, good. Yeah, I could show more, of course, how this works, and I don't know, but if time is up, then I said what I had time to say. Yeah.
But we will continue to talk about this because I have a lot on my mind. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's sit down on the couch. Johan here, come join me, please. The other speakers as well. I'm bursting with thoughts, unhelpfully. I'm sure Johan as well here. Please.
No.
Yeah. But I will let you all in. I will try to be fast. But at the same time, I just did have my mind blown as I expected. So I'm trying to gather myself here by speaking emptily. I thought what we just heard was so incredibly interesting because of a couple of sort of underlying things that you approached in this organic way and ended up realizing. And I think I make it sound as though you did it accidentally. Clearly, your work did come like is rooted in this questioning of how artistic practice is organized. I would maybe expand it to say how all kinds of non-profit ventures are organized in our society today. And we all have the problem that we live inside a society and the norms that we have are very difficult to think outside of. And what I was thinking about so much as I heard you speak is that we are in this sort of pretend market. Because it's not a marketplace. Like if we have like a föreningsliv, like non-profit associations or volunteerism and the talkoanda, as we say in Sweden, which is in Finland, sorry, which is when you go and fix somebody's house, or everybody in the village takes turns getting everybody's wheat in, or whatever it is. These are not market functions. These are completely different kinds of economies. And almost all cultural production is operating outside a marketplace in the sense of the market. And then we have to kind of pretend to be in a market to be able to like integrate in society, but also that's because we think like this. And what you've done here clearly, I'm pointing at the computer, what you've done in places and online is to go from a competition mindset to a collaboration mindset. And saying, okay, but what if we are not each other's enemies? What happens then? What if we're on the same team, basically? And that's like that sounds so simple, but it's very profound. I'm thinking in my like independent filmmakers should all be doing. Like there's so many sectors, academia. Oh my God, the crying in the meetings. We could all do this, you know. The other thing is, of course, that it happens around geographic places and physical locations. And I think that what I want to, a follow-up question to you, which I will then kind of ask both of you as well, or expand for both of you, is how does it work relative to the audience? I see what it happens in the creative community, but how do the audience engage with you? Do they find the website, basically?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, those who look for it. I think it's right what you say. It's a shift of a mindset, and maybe that's the biggest thing, to think of it as a shift of culture in a way, to make your space, or for me then, from this like idea that I'm this host and now I have to be this success story to this audience who come and I didn't talk about that now, but at Skogen from the beginning we always had a dinner after each public event. So there was someone presenting something, and then we were eating together. And the eating together was, in a way, the most important part. So you could think that was a very strange and performance that I didn't like or didn't get at all, but the food was really good, and I will come back. It takes a little bit of pressure out of the artist as well. And I think that way of also then approaching the visitor, not as this kund, what do you say, a customer, or who's like supposed to get something that is good, but instead of something that you want to learn with, and that you sit down and you eat and you'll get to know them. What are actually your skills? What are you interested in? Do you know someone who wants to present here? And then actually the program also comes in a way out of this eating together, and not like a curator trying to understand what's the coolest thing at the moment. And I think that's so. I don't know if it's a way to get the audience, but it's also the quality in how you approach them when they are there. And this, as you said also, you go a long way if you have 200 people that you know, and you know their skills, you know their knowledge, they want to help. I mean, then you're sustainable.
And they trust you, which is, I think, also very key. Trust is key in a lot of, like, trust is probably the currency in many ways. That is the clue here. I'll throw in one more thought, and then I'll let you in to just say whatever you're thinking, Maia and Marcin. I think that one of the effects of the sort of pretend market is that a lot of cultural production has been organized for over a century in terms of sort of products that we've been selling, like books or paintings or tickets to events very much, and that puts us in that has sort of obscured the fact that an audience is not a consumer, as you say. It's not a buyer of a book. That's not the audience. The audience is a relationship and a community, quite possibly. And there's something. This has been in digital games a huge transformation when they went from selling like boxes with games in them to running online communities. It was very traumatic, but transformation. But it made it very visible. And I think many places in culture, we will have to make that same journey back to communities. I could ask a question. I guess the question everybody in the audience wants answered is about how do I reach that audience? But I will just let you two in to say whatever you're thinking right now. Who would like to begin? Maia?
I think I think it's important to note that exactly there is a difference between building a community of people who have a shared practice. For instance, like you said, you have a group of artists, and you have a physical meeting space where you have a shared practice, and where there is like there is a big, there's a big drive to actually move to somewhere new, which is maybe a little bit more clunky, and you'll get to know it. And then moving people who are dissatisfied with where they are, but they are also not ready to let where they are go, like moving them onto something that would be a downgrade in, usability, in ease of use, in easy access. So I think there is like one thing is building, for instance, communities of practice with people we work with or people we share interest with. I think people will go quite a long way towards that. But like moving, for instance, if you're a cultural institution, for instance, and you have a duty as a museum to communicate with the public, getting the public onto alternative platforms is a completely different thing. And I think that's like often, you don't have to do one thing to do the other. You can start with kind of trying to build these alternatives and test different things out and try to keep it, in the closer like communities of practice. You can do these alternatives while still like, being accessible to a general public that might not be ready to move, like, okay, I'll just like shut down my Meta accounts and be on all these little weird communities. I think that's okay, that we're not arguing to shut everything down all at once, but that we're trying to build these alternatives and find some lessons on what do we actually want out of our online spaces, because like people also moved slowly towards commercial social media. And some people were first movers, and it's going to be the same when we move away.
Twitter, for instance, was built by certain kinds of practitioner communities, like journalists, for
Exactly.
instance. And so that this is it's not the wrong way to do it, to think that the sort of quote-unquote mass audience comes later. Marcin?
No, but I think often people are like, oh, there's no mass audience. It's like, no, there never is in the beginning. And maybe what we're building is not a mass audience. Maybe it's a community of practice. And then, like, what we're going to do to reach a mass audience. Like, it's also just in the last 10 years that we have this idea that you have to have a mass audience on a commercial social media platform.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we're doing something new. It's not that long, but we believe that that's the way it is. It has to be with the reality. Maybe it isn't. Maybe that's not where we want to be in the future.
Marcin?
No, I agree, and from my perspective, there are two different parts of this discussion. Partially, I really like the reference to IRC, for instance, which was, for those that were not part of that kind of movement, it was kind of text only. You chose a server, once again, but you did that by asking a friend, and then you were invited to different channels for different things. And that created a freedom of choice to also engage in meaningful conversations on topics that you actually wanted to participate in. While now we're being fed through feeds, just as you talked about as well, Maia, which is helpful if you're kind of lost, but it's also not helpful if you actually want to find something that means something to you. So I think this change is extremely important to kind of just appreciate that we move from maybe potentially from quantity to quality, that we actually need to be active users instead of just being fed. I also recognize my own kind of digital spaces now that I mainly use Mastodon for really kind of nerdy, geeky input, and then I use Signal because that's kind of where I am. I'm present, I have accounts, but I don't use other types of social media. But also, as you say, Johanna, it's about trust as well, to trust the quality of the services that Skogen provides, or the community that Skogen provides. That makes it interesting for people to join. In my case, we're investing in tools that also are open sourced, meaning that anyone with the right knowledge can engage and shape tools. And even if we're not aiming for quantity, we also see that the trust in the tools that we're building actually attracts an audience, usually in autocratic states. We, for instance, seed-funded Signal at some point that has millions and millions of users across the world. Many become billions of devices have our technologies because it's actually open source and trusted. But that's only because it's needed, not because it's glossy and shiny and kind of is fed to people. It's because it's actually needed to run the infrastructure and trustworthy communications nowadays.
I think that's so interesting, because the reason we want the mass audience, the platforms want the mass audience because they have to make money, or they want to make money. But the reason we, as culture makers or people who want to communicate ideas, we need the mass audience because we're still in this broadcast mindset where that you have to reach like millions of people to hit those people, the specific people who are your audience. But actually, if you've sold 2,000 books, you've done really well. Like, you have how many seats in this room? You only have to reach this many people, then it's full.
And that's okay.
Yeah, so if you can reach these specific people through a local community, you don't need to go via a million people to whom this is just noise because they can't be here anyway, except all of you online whom we love. So there's something backwards there. It's not wrong to be specific. It can be efficient as well. We're going to let in the audience, whom I cannot quite see. We do have microphones. Yes. Does anybody have a question at this point? Yes, there's one in the back right there. Let's start. Please keep waving until the microphone is in your hand, so everybody can help get it to you there, over there, please. Awesome, thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I had a question for Johan. I recently moved down from Gothenburg and participated in a bunch of workshops at Skogen, and I was like really impressed because it was like this form of intimate community that I hadn't experienced before. And then I moved down to Malmö and I was like, oh, I couldn't find anything similar. And I guess I have two questions. Do you see this model as something that wants to be or can be expanded to all of Sweden, to different cities? And also, if and how you do with high demand for different services, or if the model itself is somehow built against having high demand. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What was the first question again?
Can it be brought to Malmö?
Yeah,
The rest of Sweden.
Yeah, is it a model that wants to be expanded or it can be expanded?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's also like you said, that it's maybe not that we should think it's the solution to have everyone in the same room then, but then we create more rooms. We become a village, we become a city, and but I don't know. It's I'm also interested in how it can possibly grow, but not grow in the sense of having a mass audience, maybe, but in the sense of getting people together. I always think that 40 people is the best, because more than 40 people I always find difficult. Then it becomes this screaming or this kind of, I don't know. I cannot listen to more than 40 people. Even that is difficult. I mean, one people, of course, would be the best, maybe, but it's a little bit difficult. But I mean, I also worked in some bigger institutions, and I found that always very difficult. It's just too much people to really have to engage with each other, and then it becomes this kind of other thing. So I think also if I would work with a bigger institution, I would maybe think that there is like not one big audience, but several smaller, or there is like this geeky audience here, there is these people who are interested more into that, and how can we group them, and how can we make them find each other, and how can we help them to, how can we empower these different groups?
I'm going to do something possibly a little bit uncomfortable now, but the person who just asked the questions, could you stand up in the back row? Yeah. And could the others, the rest of you, those of you, everybody turn around and take a look at the person who's standing right now? Okay, so if in your mind you were like, yeah, but I want this from Malmö, you find him in the bar when we leave this room, okay? We just need like 5 more people and we've got this, okay? Thank you. Okay, you can sit down. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I can't stop doing this.
And of course, you're super welcome to use the tool to build something or connect to us.
I cannot wait. Thank you for asking that question. Do we have another one? Over there in the back and then down here in the front. Yes.
Hello, I'm Sanna and I work at a co-created creative hub in Malmö that's called Stapen. You're most welcome to come and join us. That's all that I wanted to say. Everyone is welcome.
Everybody is welcome to Stapen. Yes, we had a question down here. White shirt here. Thank you.
Thank you for the very interesting talks. I'd like to ask a question about the social platforms that we've discussed. Of what I'm like puzzling together is that you've done something wonderful in the thinking of separating the private necessary place for us to be together from the commercial aspect. What I'm thinking of is, as a creative, as a writer, author, artist, whatever, and you need to survive. Maybe you need the platforms that are commercial so that you are able to make a living somehow. I'm just asking you, difficult to formulate the question, but do you believe in a separation between these commercial platforms and these other kind of platforms that are meant for nurturing our souls, I guess?
Marcin, please, yeah.
No, I think this is extremely interesting, of course, and I think we have many different answers in the room and also on stage. But partially, I don't work in the cultural sector, but I truly believe in separation, and that's not only because kind of philosophical ideas about separation, but also about sometimes it's based on security, kind of what kind of presence do you want to have in different spaces. I also, back in the days when I was researching, I was working as an internet researcher, and what I found was that many times employers consider the private presence, online presence of their employees as a kind of branding experience. And that mix, even, I understand your position, but for most people that are employed, that's a bigger problem. So to at least have the idea and the concept of separation, I think, is valuable. But from where we are now, and also responding to your question, I think my message back to you and to others would be that we need to kind of break the idea of digital presence being the vessel of, seed funding, creating a unicorn, making a big exit. You hear that I'm from the tech space, not from the culture sector. But sometimes you need to agree that, you can admit that you need a livelihood, but maybe you can also stay with only having a livelihood instead of creating this idea of, world dominance, which is a problem in the tech sector. And I think that mind shift is a bit mind-boggling for many that work in, at least in my space.
But Maia, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of cultural workers, so that is like musicians and artists or illustrators, and like a lot of them have built up a presence and an audience on these commercial platforms, not necessarily always through sharing very intimate things, but this is where your audience is. And my advice is always like, you can't just up and leave that if your livelihood depends on it, but you also need to be aware that these platforms are getting increasingly difficult to be on, especially if you don't have a big marketing budget. You used to get a lot of free return if you were good at making content, which you often are as a creative, but you're getting shadow banned. Suddenly Facebook changes the algorithm, or Instagram, so you suddenly have to pay to get in front of the audience. TikTok does the same. So at some point it's gonna be less useful for you. I know a lot of content creators who've been like full-time content creators, and suddenly they've been hit with a shadow ban, and the platform is useless for them. It's very easy to vandalize as well. So like making an exit strategy means starting to try out different methods, like creating either these communities of practice for your own sake. For instance, my Mastodon account is very much a place I feel very like safe and relaxed, and then I have a more, I write professional stuff on LinkedIn, because then people can find me and book talks, and those two things can coexist. Of course, I should like not be two completely different people, because the internet, like people can read it, but it's just like I use them for different things. But trying to build out that exit strategy and make a list of like, okay, what do I actually use this for? What do I want to stop doing? Like it's not useful for me to doom scroll before I go to sleep, so I don't want to do that. But I actually have a core audience here. Can I start moving them somehow? Do I want to make a newsletter? Do I want to make something similar to Patreon, where I can, you can have more exclusive stuff and a more direct contact? Where else could I reach? Who's my core audience of my creative services, and where else could I reach them? So you slowly start dipping your toes, because it will drop at some point unless you have a big investment budget as a creative.
Think you said something really interesting here now. You mentioned Patreon, which is one of these services where you can sort of pay into, where audience members can engage financially directly with creatives. Because I think I have three answers to your question. One is mass media will continue existing, and that's like, there's nothing wrong with paying for advertising. It's just the illusion is that we don't have to pay for advertising in social media. We do, as Maia says. So that's one answer. Yeah, like, yes, you be mass. That's great. A second one is mass media, mass bestsellers existed before mass media existed. Word of mouth is more powerful, and we know from the research that especially Gen Z can't be swayed by advertising anyway. Word of mouth is the way to do it, and all of these small networks become big networks very rapidly. But the third answer is the business model is different if you don't have all the middlemen, because it really changes it. Like if you get like 1 crown for each unit of whatever it is, or if you get like 100, then that changes the ratio of how many people you have to reach. And then the question is it financial, or is it about my ego? Like, do I want the big audience to survive? Do I need it for that reason? Do I want it for some other reason? Also not wrong, but then maybe that can be achieved in other ways. I don't know. Do you want to come in on this, Johan?
Yeah, first, not to judge. We all try to make a living, and sometimes it just doesn't. Yeah, you do what you have to do in a way, and
100%.
and it's not to be like, what do you say, purist about it. But I think there's, I mean, we all try to be find some kind of sustainability maybe, and then what might seem like not commercially interesting might have other things into it that actually makes the life more sustainable in other ways. Maybe not only, because maybe there are also, you need to get some kind of financial money in to pay some things, but also to have a community to have relations to people, I mean, that also gives somehow, you are suddenly drawn into projects, or you're, how things work, or you're invited to eat together, or whatever. Yeah, so this, to make your life sustainable, could be in different layers, and even if it doesn't seem to give money, maybe it gives other things.
I'm realizing we're rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to let everybody say a final thing, Maia.
Yeah, I think it's also important to say, like, for instance, Cybernauterne, we're still on Instagram, we're still on TikTok, because one of the reasons we exist is to communicate to non-techies about issues of privacy, security, misinformation, disinformation. So we choose to be on the platforms where that happen. But we're also trying to direct people, like an emergency exit is like, when this platform starts crumbling, we'll go somewhere else. And I've personally experienced that with lots of places. I never use Facebook anymore. I used to have a huge account. I shut down my Twitter account. Huge to have a huge account. So we also need to get ready for this emotion. Like, yeah, this works now, but it's going to drop and you're going to go somewhere else. But if you have, for instance, a reason to do mass awareness to a mass audience with important topics, or if you're dependent on it for your survival, I don't do it as long as it works, right? That's my take. It's not about, like you say, it's not a purity test. It's also a matter of it's not going to continue working for you. So yeah.
Marcin?
No, I think the discussion has been extremely interesting. I have the privilege of being able to think about the infrastructure layer of what we talk about now, but in real life, as was said as well, we all hustle and we need to do what we do. But I really think what I bring back from this discussion is what you said, Maia, about actually having an active exit strategy, and at least try to experiment with different tools and see what works. Because when it comes down to kind of an actual time when we need to rethink what we're doing, we need to have options. And currently, if we put all the eggs in one basket, then we're out of options soon, because more difficult times will come.
Do you have a one-sentence addition to this?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to know so much also. That's also one thing. I think as an institution, you always think that we need to be the experts. But you can also say, we really don't get this, but we need to get out. And can you help us? And then people come.
I love that. And for my final thing, I'm going to hook onto that and say, what I realized listening to you all is that the geographic location, like the trust, the interpersonal trust, like in this room, for instance, or in your communities, or in our practitioner communities, is also one entry point potentially for expanding the Fediverse. So if you are an institution or an artist who already has an audience, maybe you build one of those homes, and one of your tasks, especially if you're publicly funded, could be to help people trust and onboard them into this new way of communicating. That would be fantastic. I'm going to keep you all for like 90 more seconds, and I'm going to hold your applause for these geniuses while I give you the information. Just 1 second, please stay seated. We're going to pretend that I did this in 2 different steps. This seminar is part of Learn, Create, Engage, a project that helps develop competence and strengthen people who work within the cultural and creative industries in Skåne by offering free courses and much more. And this is also a lot of opportunities to meet in rooms and talk to people who think about these things. You can go to mediaevolution.se to find the program for this fall. Just now in September, there's a bunch of things. Please notice. I like this book launch and croissants, a meal and learning at the same time. Great, but there's a lot of great events that you can be part of. Learn, Create, Engage is organized, is a collaboration between Media Evolution, Region Skåne, and has support from the European, help me out, Social Fund, is that what it's called? The European Social Fund. All right. We're going to have to leave this room momentarily, but the bar will be open until past. Please give an enormous thank you to Marcin de Kaminski, Maia, Kahlke, Lorentzen, and Johan Forsman. And thank you so much for coming by internet,